I'm Nora Elani, Director of Cambridge Rape Crisis Centre, here today at the Guildhall for the Domestic Abuse Conference on Monday the 25th of November that Cambridge City Council have organised to mark the United Nations International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls. And that day also marks the start of the 16 Days of Action, which then ends on the 10th of December, which is International Human Rights Day. And this year's theme for the 16 Days of Activism on gender-based violence is Generation Equality Stands Against Rape. And we're really delighted at Cambridge Rape Crisis that our girls group, Girl Up, have allowed us to bring a piece of their artwork that they created together. So the Girl Up group is a peer support group for girls and young women aged 13 to 16 years old who are survivors of sexual abuse and sexual violence. And the group was set up to enable girls and young women to come together who have had shared lived experience to support each other, to help combat social isolation and build a community of resilience of young survivors. The piece of work that they've made together helps to express their responses to their experiences, as well as map their journey to recovery, and also to ensure that their voices are heard.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Antoinette Jackson. I'm the Chief Executive of Cambridge City Council, and I'm delighted to welcome you here this morning for our 6th conference on the theme of domestic violence. During the conference today, we will be filming the guest speakers on stage, but it will only be the speakers and we will not be filming the audience. If you're using social media, please use the hashtag, the Twitter hashtag #CamCoercion, all one word, or hashtag White Ribbon. As you've noticed, we have a British Sign Language interpreter with us. We've got 2 working with us today, Ali and Caroline. Ali Gordon and Caroline Smith. Unfortunately, our guest speaker, Dr. Jessica Eaton, is ill and so won't be able to attend this afternoon. And so we are planning to finish at lunchtime, but we hope you'll stay and have some lunch with us. This conference marks the 25th of November, White Ribbon Day, and the United Nations International Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women, which starts 16 Days of Action to the 10th of December, which is Human Rights Day. This is the 6th conference Cambridge City Council has held on the theme of domestic abuse, and we've heard from campaigners, academics, White Ribbon ambassadors, and mostly survivors of domestic violence, abuse and coercive control. And we've been appalled, moved and inspired in equal measure. We hope you'll find this conference equally inspiring and informative, and there's a programme on your chair, and we'd be grateful at the end of the day for any feedback you have so we can plan for future events. We appreciate this conference is covering sensitive issues, and therefore if anyone at any time wants to step away, the small hall is free, and if you want some space, you're very welcome to go and use that space. It's not for me to criticise members of the Beatles, but I think John Lennon missed a verse out of his famous song, Imagine. It's the verse about imagining a world where women and girls are free to live safely and without fear, and where domestic violence and coercive control are not part of our daily experience. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I know I'm not. Like you, I'm someone who wants to make that reality happen, and that's what today is all about. Thank you. And so now I'd like to hand over to Nicky Massey, who's the Executive Councillor for Transport and Community Safety, and who will be chairing today's proceedings.
There's always a problem when I have to stand at a podium, is that I can barely be seen. And there's no mic for me to be able to wander around with, so I'm going to try to sort of stand here and hope that you all can see me. As Antoinette says, I am Nicky Massey and I'm the Executive Councillor for Transport and Community Safety, and I chair the Cambridge Community Forum on Domestic and Sexual Violence and Abuse. Since the forum was set up, we've held quarterly meetings with a variety of speakers from different areas such as education and work in schools. And at the last forum meeting in June, we had a conference for survivors and service providers in a neutral setting to discuss their experience. The reason being that we wanted to do that is we wanted to make sure that survivors know that your voices are heard, and they really, really are important to us. And we know that domestic abuse is still going on, and at conference after conference we made promises that we are going to change things, and we are changing things. But we can only do that with your help. Today we're going to be starting the conference with an update from some of the service providers who attended, so that you know your voices do matter. And first of all, we've got David Greening and Deirdre Reid. Where are they? So David Greening is the Head of Housing Services, and he's going to be talking about his work on the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance.
Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see such a lot of people here today. I wanted to start by just explaining to you a little bit about the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance and our work with that. For those of you that were here last year, you may recall that I spoke about that then, because I think we were 3 or 4 months into embarking upon going for accreditation. Now, the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance, for those of you not aware of it, is it's led by 3 organisations standing together against domestic abuse. Peabody and an organisation called Gen2, Peabody and Gen2 both being housing associations. We are one of the first local authorities in the country to actually go for domestic abuse full accreditation. And I have to say, here we are, I think we started the process in May 2018. Here we are, November 2019, and we're still not there yet. And I'm disappointed to tell you that, but by the same token, I also understand and recognise from the process that we've been going through that it is actually a very difficult accreditation to get. So I'm kind of comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with the fact that it's not just a sort of cursory assessment of how we're doing. This is actually a very detailed process, and I'm pleased to say that I think we're nearly there. We've got an assessment on the 5th of December, so I'm hoping we'll get through that. But even if we don't get through that, we will keep going until we do. The other thing I just wanted to say was sometimes in a sort of leadership role, when you are talking to members of staff and trying to get them engaged and excited about a particular project, sometimes for certain projects that can feel like a little bit of an uphill struggle. Not so with the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance programme that we're working on. The steering group and all the staff that have been involved in that have shown such energy and commitment, and from the very start really it felt like lighting the blue touch paper, because the staff I saw and were engaged with the steering group were very committed to this work, and their energy has really shone through, so I'm really pleased with that. So I want to go on to talk to you about the Survivors Conference back in June of this year, which I attended. So I attended a bit with a session where we moved around various tables, we spoke to survivors, we spoke to agencies that worked with survivors, and I was able to glean some fairly substantive feedback from that group to take back to our Daha steering group, and that is now those were distilled down into 8 points essentially, which now feature in our Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance Action Plan. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what those 8 points were, and what we intend to do about them, or in some cases what we already have done about them. So the first thing is that for some time I've felt that the way we allocate accommodation to victims of domestic abuse hasn't always been entirely ideal, in the sense that on our housing register, with the lettings policy the way it is, a victim of domestic abuse gets what we call a band B. So the way the choice-based letting system works is band A being the highest, band D the lowest. So it's a band B for someone who's experiencing domestic abuse but isn't in threat of immediate homelessness. And that comes under a banner of harassment, and harassment can take a whole different range of forms. And sometimes some of the domestic abuse cases that we've looked at, it didn't always feel that band B was appropriate. So we're looking at that. It's complex because we're with 8 different local authority partners who form a homelink partnership, and we all have to have the same banding system, so everyone will have to sort of fall into line if we decide to change that particular bit. But there is a lettings policy review at the moment, and that will be due to be concluded by March of next year. So Cambridge City is looking to propose some changes there. Also, staying on the subject of homelink and applying for housing, every applicant has what we call proof requirements to verify their housing application. So they have to provide us with a number of documents to verify things like their income, verify where they live, etc. And we recognise that for people who've experienced situations where they're, under some sort of coercive control, sometimes they haven't got their documents with them. Their documents are kept away from them. And so that process of providing all this information for us is more difficult for people in that situation. So what we're introducing is perhaps a little bit more of a light touch approach, where GPs, the IDVAs, for example, pharmacists, anyone working with those applicants can help us to verify parts of their application and thus speed up the process and make it a little bit less stressful. Now, it's clear that, so as part of my role, I'm in charge of housing management services at the City Council. So City Council has well over 7,000 tenants and in excess of 1,000 leaseholders in our properties. And it's clear that unless local authorities take action on domestic abuse, they are likely to incur further costs. So, for example, if you don't take action in a situation of domestic abuse, the property that the person who's subject to that domestic abuse is living in can get damaged, not just once, not just twice, but several times over. And that's a huge cost to the local authority. So on top of the kind of moral case that we have, and equality case that we have for dealing with domestic abuse, we also have a kind of business case to deal with it. But there will still be times when we do have to repair damage, and we have to, in a lot of cases, recharge tenants for the damage that's been done. One of the things that Savile fed back to me at the conference was that she had been recharged for work that really wasn't her fault and that she could do nothing about. So we've made an amendment to our recharges procedure to make sure that that doesn't happen again, where we're assured that domestic abuse has caused that damage. Someone also raised an issue with me, someone who'd been through our homelessness system, so they become homeless as a result of domestic abuse, and they've been placed in a hostel. So we have a range of temporary accommodation. I would argue that overall our temporary accommodation is a better standard than most local authorities, because unlike a lot of local authorities, we use a lot of our own stock for our temporary accommodation portfolio. But sometimes it's not always possible to place people in what we call the dispersed, self-contained accommodation that we have. And sometimes we have to put people in hostels, and sometimes we make that decision because we've got staff on site at those hostels, and sometimes it potentially is safer to be able to keep an eye on those individuals. But we do take the point that placing someone in a hostel with other people who may have complex needs can be quite a chaotic environment. So I think what we need to do, there's no simple answer to this, but what we've said we'll enshrine in procedure that those decisions need to be very carefully made before we decide where the best placement is for someone. And of course, with pressure increasing homelessness, we do have a lot more pressure on our temporary accommodation. For example, our bed and breakfast expenditure is slightly going up this year, so there is increasing pressure, and sometimes we have limited choices about where we can place people. Another bit of feedback I have, if someone makes a homeless application and we find that we don't owe them a statutory duty, so we don't need to house them statutorily under the Homelessness Act, then they have a right of review, and sometimes that right of a review goes to our independent reviewer. And I think we had a case where we had a complaint that the reviewer didn't show sufficient empathy with a victim of domestic abuse. So we've got an opportunity, that contract is up for renewal in June of next year, we've got an opportunity to amend that contract and make sure that anyone applying to perform that role has sufficient training in domestic abuse and perhaps understands what someone's going through and has a bit more a sympathetic, empathetic approach. Out of hours placements, so this was raised with me. Sometimes people, obviously in a domestic abuse situation, can be homeless at 3 AM when our service perhaps isn't quite as good at that time of the day as it is if they become homeless at 4 in the afternoon as a result of domestic abuse. So we do have a statutory duty to provide people with accommodation out of hours and overnight, whether it happens at 3 AM or whether it happens at 2 PM. And we have out of hours officers to do that. If our temporary accommodation is full and we're looking to bed and breakfast to provide that accommodation, it can sometimes be quite difficult to actually make a placement. So the out-of-hours services are subject to a comprehensive review at the moment, which hasn't yet been determined, so I can't tell you specifically what will happen about that, but the domestic abuse issue is being fed into that process. Another issue that got raised with me was around this very difficult issue where, for example, we've got a joint tenancy, so the victim of domestic abuse is a joint tenant with a perpetrator, and trying to change that tenancy from a joint tenancy to a sole tenancy where the survivor of domestic abuse wants to retain that tenancy and doesn't want to move. That has caused some difficulties in the past, people being asked to go through a legal route. We do think we can work with partners on this, so for example Cambridge Women's Aid have put in their most recent grant application to us around supporting this area of work and supporting people to get ouster orders, etc. So again, that's something we look to partner with organisations on to try and improve the situation there. The final thing I have, and this is probably the most difficult of the lot I think to solve, is a survivor raised an issue with me about restricting housing choice of perpetrators. So she was very clear that she wanted to stay in Cambridge. She didn't want to flee miles away from Cambridge. Her children were very settled in the schools here, etc. She felt strong enough that she wanted to stay, but equally she didn't want her former partner and domestic abuser living around the corner from her. It's a really tricky issue, this, because we have processes through some of you may be familiar with MAPA processes, where we get formal notification of MAPA level offenders, and we have to make choices or based on recommendations about restricting housing choice for those. So if someone is a perpetrator of domestic abuse and they are a MAPA level offender, then there is a process to do that. We're taking it beyond that makes things slightly more difficult, so obviously we need to give that some careful consideration and take some legal advice on how to work with that kind of scenario in the future. So that's really those kind of 8 points distilled down that I wanted to cover. I don't know if I've got time to take any questions. Yes? So if anyone's got any questions, happy to try and answer them, or I can follow up with you afterwards.
it is on. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay, thank you so much. It is really important that I wanted the survivors to hear that changes have been made since the conference that we had in June. We are listening to your to everything that was said. And as David said, you know, Cambridge City Council has implemented changes because of what we heard, and we will continue to keep listening. So now we have DG Reid, who will be talking to us about the Independent Domestic Violence Advisory Service.
Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to be here today, and thank you for asking me to come. I'm actually here on behalf of my line manager, Julia Cullen, who is the County Partnership Lead for DV and Sexual Violence. So I hope I'm a good replacement for Julia. So before I answer questions and before I feed back, I kind of thought, well, I don't know if any of this audience are going to know what an IDVA is or an IDVA does. What does this service do? And we all talk in acronyms, don't we, within our own organisations, and sometimes you think, what on earth are they talking about? I know we have a great relationship with Addenbrooke's Hospital, and I stand next to doctors, and I'm thinking, they just could be talking Swahili for all I knew. I just wouldn't know what they were talking about. So I thought, how about just giving you a whistle-stop tour of the IDVA service, and then you'll know kind of what I'm talking about when I talk about the really interesting topics that took place at the Survivors Conference that Julia went to on the 3rd of June. So I hope that's okay. So what is an independent domestic violence? So when you hear the word IDVA, that's exactly what it means. We're as independent as we can be, and we support and give options to, in every sense of the word, to victims of domestic abuse. So we're a high-risk crisis intervention service, and our job is about keeping those people safe, and we support both male and female, but we prioritise and we tend to deal with mainly high risk. Majority of our referrals come from police, about 90% of them. The other 10% come from partner services who will have contact in some way in their professional life with a potential victim of DA. So that could be housing, that could be refuge, that could be outreach, that could be rape crisis, it could be our Women's Resource Centre, it could be drugs and alcohol service, housing, it could be anybody who has a professional who comes into contact and a disclosure is made. Also, one of the hospitals in the county as well. It could be from anybody, any area of health, mental health. So that's who we are. And so we serve as the primary safeguarding lead whilst we're in that relationship. We're a voluntary service, and I think that's very important for you to know that we're not a statutory service. We are a voluntary service. We only work with people who want to work with us. We've been up and running now. This is our 16th year. We actually launched in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough in November 2003. That seems a really long time ago now. And I was privileged to be part of that launch in another role, and then went on to be an IDVA myself. So we offered support to over 2,000 victims of domestic abuse last year, and I feel very proud that we were able to do that. We're now merged. We used to be two separate services, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and we're now one. And that works very well, and I think not having that boundary, that geographical boundary within the county feels really good, and I think it makes us a lot more flexible as a team. So we have two bases. We have a base in Huntingdon, just outside Huntingdon, in Godmanchester, and then we have a base up in the city in Peterborough as well. So we cover the whole of the county. Now, has anyone heard of MARAC? Show of hands? Oh, that's excellent. So, for those of you who don't, MARAC is a multi-agency risk assessing conference. In Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, that takes place once a day, every day, 9:30, Monday to Friday, where we hear about the most high-risk cases of DB within 72 hours of taking receipt of that referral. So, for example, for referrals that are coming in today from the weekend on a Monday, we will hear them this Thursday. The ones that are coming in Tuesday, Friday, and it goes on. So we try and get that turnaround, so we're still hearing those high-risk cases as a multi-agency forum, whilst they're still, hopefully still in crisis, and we're reaching out to those clients, and also providing a holistic approach, a multi-agency coordinated approach to that support. And we hope that our clients feel that that is the way. We learn every day is a school day for us, and I won't say we have a perfect service, but we're constantly striving to, and that's why I think the Survivors Conference is a great opportunity for us actually to be honest with ourselves and look at our service and go, okay, how can we improve things? How can we improve things for that client? How can we make them feel safe, and what can we do? And some of those changes are actually quite simple, and hopefully they're quite effective. So I have, I don't have, but the youths that work with me, we have one in each area, so, and they kind of equate to district councils. So we have an in for the city, the South Cams, East Cam, Hunts, Fenland, and then we're divided Peterborough up into northwest, east, just north, east, south, and west. So that's how we're divided up. So we're very much wanting to engage with clients whilst they're still in crisis, and that's, in our experience, that's a really good time to engage with them, and for that engagement to be robust and to be sustained during their crisis, and for us to see them through that crisis, and we can help them in a number of ways. So these are, I'm not getting, there we go. So there's a number of ways in which we can help them, and that's target hardening in their home. If they're wanting to stay in their home, but actually it's not safe. It might be that the perpetrator has a key. It might be that it's not got window locks. It's not. So we have a wonderful charity called the Bobby Scheme, which was set up in 1999 by the Cambridgeshire Police Tributary Trust. And there are two amazing men who cover the whole of the county and assist us in making properties that DA victims live in a safer place to be. And whereas before, although they've been in place since 1999, they used to focus more on elderly victims of, say, scam burglaries, people calling at their door, and then working their way into the house and perhaps stealing from them, threatening them. So it started like that, and then extended its service, not just to generic vulnerable victims, but to victims of DA, which helps us enormously in helping victims feel safe. And in fact, that was one of the feedbacks that we got from that discussion at the Survivors Conference about how the Bobby Scheme did make them feel, and it did work. So that was really nice to hear, and to validate that what we're doing and what the Bobby Scheme do is a good job. So we also took accessing refugees, raising awareness of DV, support with housing. We have a lovely relationship with housing, and that relationship is so important. We have support also with legal processes, so we have good relationships that we've built over the years with solicitors around the county, who we recommend because we know they're good, because we use them time and time again, and if they're not good, then we don't use them again. So that works really well as well. We support people through, if they want to go down the legal route and they want to make a formal complaint to the police, we will obviously support them through that process as well. And that can be from a very short time to a very long time. Sometimes Crown Court trials can take up to over a year to come to fruition, and we will support them through that time. If they're not wanting to go down that route, that's absolutely fine. So our job is about giving options and empowering victims. It's not about telling them what to do, because they might not be at the right place on their journey to want to go down that route. But they may want to go down the civil court route of perhaps obtaining an order, like a non-molestation order or an occupation order, that prevents the perpetrator returning to the family home. And that gives, they don't last forever, the occupation orders don't, but they give us a window of opportunity about thinking about permanent housing options, safer permanent housing options. So it is about options, and it is about not sitting in judgment on them, but actually listening to what they want and to how they're feeling, or whether they're... So safety plans are individual. Every safety plan with all our clients has to be individual, because it needs to be based on what they want and their needs as well. Is that all making sense? Please shout if it's not. So we have specialist client-based IDVAs, who I'm exceptionally proud of, as well as all the rest of them. We have two young people, two young persons IDVAs, who cover north and south of the county, and they support young victims between the age of 13 and 19 who have gone into abusive, intimate relationships, and often quite prematurely. So we've had some clients as young as 14, 15, and I think probably the one I remember the most was a lovely 17-year-old lady, young woman, who had 2 children, and she was in her 3rd abusive relationship. And that's just so sad. And the last incident happened where the perpetrator found out where she was, and it was temporary accommodation, and he forced his way into the property, and he assaulted her while she was carrying their new baby. So that was a great challenge for our young persons, and that relationship lasted a long time, and it certainly, I think, paid off in the end, because she became independent. She chose not to move into any other relationships for the foreseeable future, and she just concentrated on her own health and well-being, and looking after her children and keeping her children. And with a lot of support, she successfully kept her children as well, which was lovely. So we also have a Stalking and Harassment IDVA, who's quite new to us. She's very stretched, she covers the whole of the county, and she focuses on victims who have been subjected to stalking by a partner, ex-partner or family member, but also she deals with non-DA stalking and harassment cases. She works incredibly hard, and this role's been supported by the Susie Lampley Trust. She did a lot of her training there, as well as her basic IDVA training through Safe Lives. So at the moment, we're so stretched that we're only actually taking high-risk victims, because she's one person, she covers the whole of the county. And as much as I could replicate her about 3 times over, that's how it is for the moment. We have to be accepting that funding is limited. We also have an AA IDVA who supports victims from designated Eastern European AA countries, and she speaks fluent Russian and Polish. And again, that was really interesting feedback as well from the Survivors Conference, in that the feedback we got from those women. I have to say the majority of our clients from Eastern European are women. We have had very, very few men, and that's just the way it is. It's what's come in through the door, but we would support both. But they've all said how beneficial that's been to be able to talk freely in their own language, because some of them have very, very limited and sometimes no English. How they survive, I mean, they're just so brave, how they survive in a country. And the perpetrator often isolates them from gaining that knowledge and that independence about learning English and about mixing outside their own culture. And so they're often very, very isolated. So they found it very empowering to actually have that support from an IDVA who spoke their language. And they felt, and things get lost in translation, don't they? And so they very much felt that they were being listened to, and the IDVA was hearing what they said, which was lovely. And we also have a health IDVA who covers Addenbrooke and Hinchingbrook, and those referrals come from all hospital services. So a lot come from A&E, we get some midwifery from the Rosie, and also from clinics, from wards. So it might be a patient who's been brought in for an operation, absolutely nothing to do with domestic abuse at home, but they've made that disclosure to a nurse or a doctor or a member of hospital staff. So, and one of the questions was quite sweet, and it said, how does the health IDVA start a conversation in Addenbrooke's? And I think that largely depends on what we know. What we try to desperately do is not re-traumatise our clients by making them go through everything they've already been through. And that was another question and another feedback. And that's something that we've had some training on this year, because I think that's so important, that when we pick the phone up safely to clients, to new clients, is not actually wanting them to, or trying to get them go down that road where we're trying to just get them to regurgitate everything that's happened in the most recent crisis. Because all it does, it tends to re-traumatise them, and then we don't get that wonderful engagement that we could have and do all that good work with them. So we are acutely aware of that, and that training's been really beneficial to us in about how we can turn that around and just have more open questions like, how are you today? Is today a good day? Not a good day? How are you feeling? And then that leads us in, then it's about listening to where they are at that time. Where are the risks at that time? Because that's what we want to get to. And then we can talk about how we can safeguard them, and then we can talk about how we can help them based on what they've told us. So, and also even before that, I think it's really good to be honest and open with them about our service and about our confidentiality. So they're not feeling betrayed somewhere down the line when they tell us something that leads us to believe that, oh my God, one of the children in the household is at immediate risk of significant harm, and we have to do something. We have to respond to that. We can't ignore it. So it's about that honesty and openness, I think, at the beginning of our relationship that's really important, and that was certainly something that was spoken about in the Survivors Conference as well. So that for our specialist client base, there is no risk threshold. So it doesn't matter whether they're low risk, high risk, medium risk, it doesn't matter. And that's the lovely thing about it. All we need is consent. So if we take a referral from one of the hospitals, we just need consent. And that can be verbal consent. But we have to be honest, do you give permission to share your details? Do you want this kind of support? And I have to say, we have a great relationship that we've forged with safeguarding nurses throughout the hospital. Avonbrook is such a huge place, isn't it? And it's just like entering into a city. I think it's like joining the M25 at 70 miles an hour every time I go there. But we have developed over the years. I think we've had a hospital liver in Avonbrook certainly since 2012. And that's been a slow journey, I have to say. But I'm hoping that that will be productive and continue to be productive. Interesting research that a lot of victims, especially in the early part of their abuse journey, will disclose to health professionals. Now that might be because they feel safe, so their GP, their midwife, their health visitor, anyone who they might come into contact with within health, and research tells us that they do tend to disclose, and hence that's our reason for actually having an IDVA within that environment, so we can actually address abuse at an early stage, and that's our thinking behind it. So these are some of the responses from, because when we close the case, we invite response. If they want to give it, they can. If they don't have to. And it always makes me feel really, really warm inside when I read some of these. You can read them for yourself. And it's just lovely because it makes you feel, it makes you feel like that you're going down the right road and you're on the right track, and you're on the right path. This is the last one we had last week for a case that had been open to one of our IDVAs for a very long time. And she even, when she was in supervision, she actually had a tear when she first read that because she didn't know what had been said. So that was quite nice. I'm sorry, I feel like I've rambled on a lot. But it's lovely to be here with you. If you've got any questions, please feel free, and I'll be around till lunchtime, so if you want to know anything or anything more about the Survivors Conference, I'm just conscious of time. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Deidre. I think think it's really important to know the kind of work that the IDVAs are doing and the different specialities, and it's important for us to hear how stretched they are, and that's something that maybe is that we can take away with us and look to the future with. I'd now like to introduce Sergeant Susie Tinsley, who will be talking to us on behalf of Cambridgeshire Constabulary.
Good morning, everybody. As I said, I'm Sergeant Susie Tinsley, so I work for Cambridgeshire Police. I also have a bit of another hat as well. I'm a peer inspector for Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Service, so I go off and work with them, and they're the independent kind of body who govern what the police do and hold us publicly accountable. And I thought it might be worth just to pull a few little bits over from their inspection regime around domestic abuse, so you can see nationally how the police are also held accountable. And in relation to that, the yearly inspections that every police force get, domestic abuse is always looked at. So it's always something that they feel that's really important, that they need to hold the police accountable for. And the specific things that they look for as well in the crimes and how we investigate the crimes and when we close those are looking at when there isn't enough evidence to make sure that actually the police have looked at everything that they should be doing and we're not just doing kind of half an investigation. And the other code that they look at is when victims withdraw their consent to say, I don't want you to investigate this crime anymore. And again, then they look at how police forces investigate those to make sure that we're not just saying, well, the victim won't engage, so we can't do kind of any more on that. To make sure we've had proper engagement, we've taken every possible opportunity we can to engage with victims. And not just at that kind of immediate part, so if they come back a few weeks later, having worked with the IDVA service to say, I'm ready now, I'd like to do something on this, that we make sure that we keep those options open. So I thought that might be a bit useful. And they also look at the domestic abuse side in relation to children, so the National Child Protection Inspection looks at the effects on children and has a whole kind of deep dive into that area as well. So nationally it's really important. And Deirdre mentioned our MARACs. We have daily MARACs in Cambridgeshire, and having been around to lots of other forces nationally, lots of other places generally still have monthly MARACs. They have that one meeting once a month. We have ours every single day. So it just shows in Cambridgeshire we're quite progressive. As a multi-agency, we work really well together and we're really quite committed to kind of push the boundaries and to push things forward to provide services to stop domestic abuse. We also have 2 levels of scrutiny within Cambridgeshire in relation to domestic abuse, so kind of operational scrutiny meeting. That's a multi-agency meeting with the IDVA service, the Crown Prosecution Service, the Court Service, and the police, looking at the last kind of month's worth of work. And we look into about 30 crimes over that time to look at what's kind of gone wrong, what things we can change, and what went well, to make sure that we're actually kind of quality assuring what we've been doing, and to work, because it's not just that one agency on its own. We can only stop domestic abuse and we can only get better when we work together. So by having lots of different partners around that table enables us to make sure that we learn together and we get better together. The next level up is a delivery group, so issues that are kind of a bit higher level that we can't actually resolve at that kind of tactical working group, again go up to the kind of the next level to unblock those at the kind of strategic kind of end, to then look with partners at what we can do to make things better. We have a single lead for domestic abuse in Cambridgeshire, and that's Chief Inspector Dan Middleton, who should have been here today, but he's not able to, so asked me to attend. But he's been in post for quite a long time and is completely committed in relation to domestic abuse, and keeping that same person for a period of time is really important, rather than changing that person over and over and you lose sight of kind of what you've done. Domestic abuse is one of our 4 kind of priorities as well. We set priorities every year to say what's important, what's the threat and risk that the people of Cambridgeshire are suffering, so we can direct our resources to say this is what we need to be working at. This is the really kind of serious stuff going on in Cambridgeshire for this year, and this is what we need to do. And domestic abuse is certainly that, and has been for the last significant number of years as well. In relation to the Survivors Conference, which Dan Middleton kind of attended, we had a few questions coming out from that he wanted me to feed back to you. The first one was saying that, is there a law against someone with a serious record or an offence changing their name? And there isn't. Somebody can change their name if they want to, change their name by deed-poll. We can't do anything about that. And the question was, would those changes of name show on a Clare's Law kind of disclosure? If we had information around that person, as you can imagine, with the people that we deal with, quite often people change their name a lot, whether that's legally or non-legally, but they'll tell us their name is one thing and it'll be another. Our information systems are geared up to make sure we have one master record, but if they've ever gone by up to however many different names, they'll all be connected on that one record. So when we come to do our research into making sure that we're disclosing the right information under a Clare's Law disclosure, which is telling a potential victim around the abusive history of their new partner, that we make sure that we kind of checked all of that out. So if we hold that information, we will certainly disclose it. The second point was saying that, is there a way for survivors to be kept up to date, even if there is no news, in relation to perpetrators being released from prison? Well, prison releases is all around the probation service, so they're the people who would be updating the victim in relation to that, and it's not something that the police would necessarily have a huge amount of involvement with, but they may do on occasion. The third point was that, can the wider picture of domestic abuse be taken into account rather than each individual being viewed in isolation? So when we attend an incident, that we look at the whole holistic view and story of what life is like for that victim and the kind of the build up to that point. And this is a changing picture of certainly police training over the last few years, and something that we're kind of much more moving towards. And it's much more impactful. Instead of kind of turning up and going, X, Y, and Z has happened today, and that's all we're looking at. When we take statements and do our kind of victim personal statements, that whole story is really important. And certainly when we look at work with children as well, around the lived experience of children and what life is like for people in crisis, that's the bit that we're really trying to capture, because that's the bit that makes you understand what's going on, and also as a partnership enables you to put the best services around that person and to get the right referrals really quickly. And in relation to Deirdre saying about the adverse services, generally for kind of high-risk victims, we also have the Police Victims and Witness Hub, which is our victims and witness service within the police, and within that they provide services to excuse me, the lower level victims of domestic abuse. So if you're a lower level victim, it doesn't mean to say you get nothing, quite the contrary. There is a service that is available to you. It just means that the kind of the really high risk specialist stuff goes to the adverse service, and then it's a specialist domestic person within the Victims and Witness Hub that works on the slightly lower level stuff. But there is crossover and join over between the two. Another question was, what's the difference between a civil and a criminal matter? See, the police deal in criminal matters. We're not experts in the civil world. We don't know every piece of kind of legislation. So it's really hard for the police to give advice to victims around civil matters, which is where we rely on our partners to do that for us, because they're kind of the experts within that. So it's something that the police deal in the criminal side and take people to court. We direct people towards solicitors to get kind of legal help and advice if they want to look at civil matters. The next question was, is coercive and controlling behaviour relatively new to the police? Well, it's a new piece of legislation that came in October last year, in 2018. So it is a new piece of legislation, but it's really, really welcomed by the police, because previously we could turn up at incidents and see things happening, but it would almost be that the offender hadn't quite done enough that we could shoehorn into, well, they've not hit you, or it's not this traditional crime, so it's really hard for us to take action against them, because there's no quite piece of legislation that fits. So coercion and control, that new piece of legislation that came in, was really, really beneficial for us to go, actually, we've got something that fits now. This is really, really good. We can now take action and help to safeguard people, because we've got the legislation there, we can hold people accountable. It is new, and we have done lots of training to frontline officers as well, to just give them that kind of legislation kind of changes on what they need to do, but we have made prosecutions under coercion and control. The next question was, is information shared between police forces, and how does this impact on the case? So we hold, as you can imagine, a lot of information about a lot of people. And when it's around people who've gone to court or been arrested, we have the Police National Computer, and information is put on there, and we have various other computer systems where we share kind of information. And there's certainly kind of nationally a big push to say that police forces need to make sure they share information better, which is why we've all gone kind of across to much more of a shared platform. There's also information sharing across partners, which is appropriate, so actually we can then look to go, how can the partnership get information when that consent's been given, to help safeguard people and work together in the best interests of victims. And the last question that came out was saying that, can the police help me to retrieve my possessions from my house? And this is a really tricky kind of question, or it's a simple question, tricky answer. We can do in some circumstances, but not in all. We do get a huge amount of requests in relation to this, but it's not a service we generally offer as standard, because we want people to explore other options of how they can do that without using a police resource. And the reason for that is not because we don't want to, it's because the demand coming in for our services is so huge that actually we have to pick and choose what we attend in terms of threat, risk and harm. And if there's another safe option for a victim, then we would encourage them to say, could you possibly do that? If there is absolutely no other option and nothing else, then potentially we'd be looking obviously to help and support people and keep people safe. Dan Middleton then had a couple of extra conversations with survivors on the day that he wanted me to just pull a few points out from. And saying that a survivor said to him that there was no trauma-informed approach by police officers. And again, as we've heard a bit about that kind of trauma-informed concept of not wanting to ask you to kind of re-explain everything, it is a really tricky situation for the police, because we need to ask you enough questions to gather the evidence to know what's happened, to be able to make sure we have successful prosecutions. But we don't want you to have to explain it 3 times over until you get to the right person. And again, we have training kind of coming up, and we had a big training programme in March around trauma-informed kind of views to policing and done some work with the local prison who've done a training service in relation to that as well. So it's something that we're much more aware of, but it's that balance between asking enough to get the information without putting that stress on you to say, actually, I've said this 3, 4, 5 times now to however many different people. And I think that's about it. So I just wanted to end there with saying that Cambridgeshire Police are completely committed to domestic abuse, and we have been for a significant period of time. We have a lot of governance, both at a higher level and a practical level. And it's something that we take seriously and work really closely with our partners in relation to domestic abuse, because it's not something that we can do on our own. We can only do it together with everybody fighting for the rights of for victims.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for speaking with us, and that you are around even during the break if there are any other questions that people want to ask. Thank you very much. Thank you. Just quickly, I know it's quite cold in here. We have had a problem with our boiler. We're hoping it's going to be fixed. And in fact, I've just sent somebody to go and get my coat because it is quite chilly. So that's the reason why. Just wanted everyone to know. So we've had some really good updates. We had some great updates from David Greening in regards to the work that our housing team has done after our survivors conference in regards to having a review of our letting policies, having a light touch to documents so that we don't constantly ask people to come for documents that they haven't got anymore. And we're also reviewing the issue about recharging for breakages that's related to domestic abuse. We've then had the Deirdre come and talk to us about the IDFAs, and it's really, really interesting that, and in some ways nice to know that 2,000 women have been helped in the past year, but equally quite astounding to think that there is 2,000 people in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough that has needed the help of the IDFA service. And then hearing again from Susie in regards to what the police is currently doing. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome to the stage the Chief Executive of Cambridge Women Aid, Angie Stewart.
So thank you so much for inviting me to come today to speak to you all. I'm going to try and speak slowly, but that's a challenge for me. And just to give you an update on the work of Cambridge Women's Aid. Very fitting that today is the United Nations Day for the Elimination of Gendered Violence Against Women, because of course that is the dream. That's what we would like to see. So I've worked for Cambridge Women's Aid for 18 years. Very proud to do so, but I'm really sick of men's abuse of women and children. I'm sick that it's not becoming a lesser problem. I'm sick of the impact that it has on the lives of those who experience it, and I would like it to stop. So for those of you who do not know what we do at Cambridge Women's Aid, we support mainly women and children who are affected by domestic abuse. We are a specialist agency focusing on just this. This is our passion, this is our work, this is our expertise. And we have provided life-saving services in Cambridge since 1977. Since then, we have helped thousands of women and children escape domestic abuse, and we know that we've saved many lives. So we share our expertise through education and training and helping others understand domestic abuse. But our core work is the provision of safe refuge and our support services in the community. So I'll tell you a little bit about them. In Cambridge, we provide safe refuge to 11 women, around 15 children each night. So they come to us because they are at serious risk of harm or homicide. They might refer themselves, or they might be referred to us by other agencies that they're working with. And they've often come far to be safe, and they're in a crisis. They come to Cambridge because nobody knows them there, and so they've come a long, long way to be safe. This is not an easy thing. You could imagine at your lowest point having to skip up your children, your belongings, come far away to a place that you don't know in the hope that the people who greet you there will look after you. It's amazing that they do that. At their lowest point, these women have to be superwomen, but that's what they do. Then they do find their way, and when they come, they're given a warm welcome, and we work so hard to meet their initial needs and settle them down quickly. I'm always struck by the surprise that women, when they arrive, they go, oh, this is nice. The refuge is nice. They didn't expect it to be nice. It should be nice. All refuges should be nice and available and have spaces in them, but that's becoming harder and harder these days. Our work is also trauma-informed and needs-led, so this means that we will work very hard to understand that woman's life, what it is that she needs to happen. We're not process-driven, so our focus is always going to be on how can we help elevate that woman and her children to help them move on to safety and independence. So as well as the refuge, we have an outreach service that is for women living in our area. So this is community-based support, available by phone or in person. We will support women at all stages of their relationship, and often we will work alongside other agencies such as the IDVAs, which we've heard from Dee today, police, housing, lots of other agencies, providing much of the support services Dee has set out that the IDVAs do for high-risk victims. And we will work with women of all levels of risk. And we're open access. There is no process to access our outreach service. People can just pick up the phone and they can call us. And this matters that we have a service like that because there's many reasons that someone cannot or will not get involved in statutory agencies. And of course, they still need access to an open access, confidential service with a high level of understanding about domestic abuse and what can be done about their situation. Because a lot of our work is about helping people with the understanding about their situation, because that can be tricky. It's not an easy thing to get your head around, domestic abuse. It's brain-squeezingly difficult because we all expect people to think like us and to act like us. It's incredibly hard to understand that somebody who appears to care about you will actually go out of their way to manipulate and lie in order to get their own way and the upper hand. It's very hard to understand why somebody would do that if you've not come across it before. It's not something that we are trained to recognise and respond to in our relationships. So we do this, and we do support around safety, housing, working with other agencies. A lot of our work is around supporting women going through the family courts, managing child contact safely. That can be incredibly difficult. But above all, we seek to give a human response. I think that's one of the things that we do incredibly well. We're open-led, so we're open-ended in our support, so people can drop in and out of our support as they go along. And we always do as much as we can. We can't do much about other agencies that are impacted by lack of resources and constricted with what they can do. But we will always endeavour to be available. We'll always endeavour to give that support. We answer our phones 365 days a year. Jess answered it at 5:30 this morning, as I've heard already today. And give that solid support ongoing as much as we can. So we have paid workers who are amazing. We have low staff turnover, so they must like the work. But what that means is we get to retain that expertise, and that matters. Having that level of expertise really impacts on what we can do. And as a staff group, we are privileged to get to do this work. We really do feel privileged and honoured that we get to do it. We get to meet the most remarkable women and children who have endured so much and worked so hard to try and regain their life and their sense of self. And it's never easy, and it does take time. Our services are very highly rated by those who use them, and this is significantly in part to the Cambridge Women's Aid workers, who put so much effort, passion, expertise and care into their work. It is my immense privilege to work with every one of them. There's no denying that this is hard work, but it is made easier by the solidarity and the support that we give each other. And I thank all of you for that. Thank you. But I wanted today to speak about power, how power is misused by those who abuse, and how the power of all of us can be used to tackle the issue of domestic abuse. Domestic abuse is an abuse of power. We have moved on in society from believing that domestic abuse is only about physical harm, because it's when one person wants to control another, and they use a range of behaviours to do that, or the fear of a range of behaviours to achieve that. So the behaviours, of course, are commonly they'll be emotional, physical, psychological, sexual, economic abuse. But generally 2 things will be present in domestic abuse. The perpetrator will hold the belief that he, because it's most commonly a he, the perpetrator will hold the belief that he is entitled to behave abusively, and he will also have the power for that abuse to be impactful. The abusive behaviour, it might be to inflict physical harm, or the fear of physical harm, but often it's going to be about the social power that he holds, that he uses to abuse. So for example, the power to leave you and your children without food, control of your immigration status, control of what is classed as truth, control over your well-being, your status in your social groups. All of these types of abuse will be made escaping the situation so difficult and must be made visible. Because domestic abuse, it reduces a person, so much is chipped away as you try harder and harder to avoid the abuse. I'd like to read you a quote by Laverne, who is a radio presenter, about her own experience of domestic abuse that I think sums up this process very well. She says, "What I remember most about emotional abuse is it's like being put in a box. How you end up in there is the biggest trick. Maybe you think it's a treasure box at first, you're in there because you're special. But soon the box will start to shrink. Every time you touch the edges, there is an argument, so you try to make yourself fit. You curl up, become smaller, quieter, remove the offensive parts of your personality. You eliminate people and interests, you change your behaviour, but still the box gets smaller and you think it's your fault." So this year we're on a mission to get people talking about domestic abuse. That quote from Laverne is used in our Ask Me project, which we started in April this year. So we've started this project because we know that people within a survivors community, they're often the first to know that domestic abuse is happening, but all too often they will lack understanding and confidence that will make people afraid to talk about it, or unsure of how to respond when someone speaks out. Survivors have told us that they can feel judged, silenced, or isolated by the people around them. So the Ask Me project tackles this head on. It gets participants to think about the many diverse communities that they are part of and ways that they can break the silence about domestic abuse in those communities. So I'm delighted to report that we currently have 99 amazing people who've joined the project. This is great because our target was 100 and we're not finished yet, so that's fantastic. The project is led by Sophie, and she's supported by Kate and Katie, and they do an amazing job. And also our trustees and all the workers have got involved in this project this year, which has been fantastic. And so what they will get is the people who join the project, they receive 2 days of training around domestic abuse and ongoing support to break the silence and to share that information in their communities. So far this year, they've talked to their friends, their families, their work colleagues about domestic abuse. They've discussed it online. They have shared information about our services. They've put up posters. They've raised money. They are absolutely doing what we hoped that they would. And this matters because so far, 83% of those 99 ambassadors, they have reported they have been able to share information about domestic abuse services with a survivor of domestic abuse. That's what we want to happen. And their reach is remarkable. For example, one Ask Me ambassador, she used her business to put on a breakfast meeting for employers in Cambridge to discuss domestic abuse and what employers can do about it to support survivors. And this has led to action on workplace policies, support for local services, had a huge reach of all those employers with all the employees that they have. So I'd like to thank all of those who've taken part so far. Seeing the determination of our communities to act on domestic abuse has been heartening. And of course, many of our community ambassadors, they are survivors themselves. And I would like to pay tribute to them particularly, because they are our experts who do so much to educate and inform us on what we do, to influence change, to give back, to help us reach the next woman who needs our services. Many of them gave their time at the Survivors Conference in June this year. I loved that conference. I loved going around hearing about what people thought of our service, what worked, what we did well, what were the things that we could do better. I thank everybody who came and gave their time because it mattered. So I'm going to finish just telling you about one thing that we did that came out of that Survivors Conference. So I was really struck by hearing several women talk about what would have helped them on their journey, because it is a journey, about hearing them describe about the number of times that they have become experts in the area of so much. They've become experts in how social services works, how the courts work, how the police work, how housing works, all of these things. And they wish that they could have understood that all immediately on day one, which is tricky. But they also spoke about the information and the paperwork that they have to hold about their situation as they seek to try and get some change in their life, and how sometimes it's hard to hold all of that. And it's really hard to share all of that information with the agencies that we work with. So we thought about this, and we thought long and hard. We thought there's handbooks already for survivors, but sometimes that information can feel overwhelming. We thought about the difficulties that women have collecting and holding information about the abuse that they have suffered, particularly if they still have abusers in their lives. We thought about the needs for agencies to be able to quickly understand a woman's situation so they can respond appropriately, particularly if it's a complex situation, as often it is. So what we've come up with, very modern, we've come up with an app. We've come into the future. It's amazing. The app is similar to, a bit like, you'll understand, I don't really understand technology. The app is a bit like the Facebook one that sits on your phone, but it doesn't live there, it lives on the internet. So the app is just a way to bring that information onto your phone and the way to put information back onto the internet. So it's a secret app as well. It's wonderful. So the people who have designed it have put so much work into making sure that it cannot be accessed by anyone other than the person that it's intended for. And the information that will live on that app, that belongs to the woman herself. She will have her own account, but we will all have the ability to add things to it, like fact sheets about going to court, summaries of her situation, etc. The app can store copies of court orders, injunctions, crime numbers, etc. It can also store a short summary from one of our workers, setting out her history and of current concerns so that she could show that to a police officer or other agencies if she's seeking urgent help in a crisis, and hopefully they will immediately understand her situation without having to do any research around that. So what we're going to find is that we know that women's journey to escape domestic abuse is not linear. Often she will go in and out of services as well. And so what this app will do is enable her to ensure that the work done while we've supported her will not be lost, that chronologies that have been written and information that will be gathered, that will be stored in the app for her to keep and to use at any time that she sees fit. So we're incredibly grateful to our community supporters who put us in touch with a local IT company, Redgate, who did our app for free. They were just going to do proof of concept, but they got carried away and they actually made it, which was fantastic. They have a Down Tools Week, and they have lots of different projects people can sign up for. And when I went to visit them, I was really heartened to see that our page where people could sign up, people had stuck 2 lots of paper underneath because so many people had signed up to do it. Just showed how incredibly popular this area is of people wanting to do something about it. You know, it's been a challenging year in the domestic abuse world, despite the efforts to improve things that we've heard about locally today. But I think the biggest disappointment has been the failure of the domestic abuse bill to come to fruition. We need that so badly. It's terrible that unfortunately the country's attention has been taken up with other things. So hopefully that will come soon. I would just like to pay tribute to our community of workers, sister organisations, survivors, statutory partners, funders, ambassadors, our community supporters, both individual and businesses, who all come together with us to help us tackle men's violence against women. We all have power we can use, and we must use it because we are stronger together. Thank you.
We're next going to hear from Nora Alani, from the Director from Cambridge Women's Rape Crisis. I can't actually see her though. I'm here. She's over there.
I have to say, having adrenaline pumping around your body because you have to do public speaking is a really good way to keep warm, I'm just saying. thank you, Nicky. I am indeed Nora El-Arani, Director of Cambridge Rape Crisis Centre. And it's really great to be here with you all this morning to share with you this year's United Nations International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls. My thanks go to Cambridge City Council for organising today's event and for all of the work that I know that goes on behind the scenes in bringing something like this together. I know it's already been said today, but I think sometimes good stuff is worth saying more than once. So I just want to reiterate that I understand that hearing about and talking about domestic abuse and sexual violence is not always an easy thing to do. My talk is not intended to be distressing or triggering, but by the nature of what I will talk about, sometimes it can be. So it's just about everybody being mindful of that and taking care of yourselves and each other during the morning. And if you need to take a break at any time and leave the hall, please feel at ease to do so. You don't need anyone's permission to care well for yourself. For those of you who are not familiar with us, Cambridge Rape Crisis Centre is a local specialist sexual violence organisation, and we are here to provide dedicated support services to survivors of rape, sexual abuse and any form of sexual violence, regardless of whether that's historic, recent, current or ongoing, by known or unknown perpetrators. Essentially, we are here to provide safe space and protected time to enable survivors to begin to cope and recover from the trauma of their experiences, to take back control of their decision-making, and to hold on to the hope for change, safety and peace in their lives, and to go on to flourish and thrive. The dedication and commitment of our staff and volunteers at Rape Crisis is, I think, a thing of beauty and wonder. And without them, we couldn't possibly be the organisation that we are today. And it's lovely that there are staff and volunteers here today from Rape Crisis. We provide a range of core support services to survivors in Cambridgeshire, and that includes a confidential telephone helpline, email support, therapeutic support through trauma-informed counselling and talking therapies. We also have an independent sexual violence advocacy service, and our ISVAs provide both practical and emotional support to survivors, and they also specialise in supporting survivors who choose to engage in the criminal justice system. And within that team, we have specialist children and young people's ISVAs who work with children and young people who are survivors of abuse and exploitation. We've brought with us today a piece of artwork from one of our peer support groups, and it's actually in the small hall. So if you haven't been in there yet, please do take some time at the lunch break to have a look at the artwork. It's been done by our Girl Up group. The Girl Up group is a peer support group for girls and young women aged 13 to 16 years who are survivors of sexual abuse and sexual violence. The group was set up to enable girls and young women with shared lived experience to come together, to support each other, to help to combat feelings of social isolation, and to build a community of resilience of young survivors. The girls in the group produced a piece of artwork that's next door together in response to their experiences, to capture their journey of recovery, and as a way of speaking out and being heard. It means a great deal for us from Rape Crisis that the girls have agreed to allow us to have the piece of work here at conference, as it's so essential that we never have events like this without the voice of survivors in the room with us. Just to say also that we have wonderful Rosie Laverne here with us today, who's one of our CHISVAs. Rosie's waving. Rosie was instrumental in setting up the Girl Up group at Rape Crisis and co-facilitated the group. So Rosie will be around at lunchtime if you want to have a chat with her about the group or the work. This year's theme for the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence is Generation Equality Stands Against Rape. This theme is very close to our hearts. Cambridge Rape Crisis Centre has been taking a stand against rape and sexual violence for over 35 years. And I have been part of that journey with Rape Crisis for almost 10 years now. It's a long time to stand. So I thought what I might do is take this opportunity this morning to reflect back over the last decade and notice what, if anything, has improved. Has society's understanding of the causes and consequences of sexual violence deepened? How are we responding to those who are subjected to sexual violence and those who perpetrate it? What has changed and what is still left to be done? I have to say, there's a spoiler alert here. There's still quite a lot left to be done, as it turns out. So what I did was I took a look back over the last decade and tried to capture just some of the key points in this time around sexual violence. I then had to narrow that down to enough points that I could stick on one slide, because there's been an enormous amount that's been happening in the last 10 years. Some of these, if not all, will probably be familiar to you. Firstly, the Jimmy Savile abuse scandal, which came to light in 2012, a year after Jimmy Savile died. It revealed the horrific extent of the abuse that Jimmy Savile perpetrated against hundreds of children over 4 decades. There were 400 victims that he abused in that time. Much of that abuse took place in institutions and organisations who did nothing to challenge, stop or call out his appalling behaviour. In the last decade, we also saw coverage of the Rotherham, Rochdale and Oxfordshire grooming gangs, who brutally abused and exploited hundreds of girls, many of whom actually spoke out about the abuse at the time, but were either not believed or were somehow held responsible for what was happening to them despite the fact that they were children. It is estimated that 1,400 girls have been sexually abused by gangs in Rotherham alone. And in 2014, the Independent Inquiry of Child Sexual Abuse was launched, the biggest inquiry of its kind in this country. And that inquiry was launched in direct response to the Jimmy Savile abuse and grooming gang scandals. So the purpose of the inquiry is vast, but in its essence, it is to capture the extent and impact of institutional abuse of children and young people who were potentially and catastrophically let down by the very institutions who should have cared and protected them. I imagine many people will remember the media coverage of the President's Club, which was a charity dinner that was held annually for men only. And an undercover reporter courageously went into the President's Club and uncovered the relentless sexual harassment of the women who were employed as serving staff at the event. And as a result of that coverage and that story, the President's Club shut down, which is a good thing. We've also seen a significant number of reports throughout the last decade looking at the extent of sexual violence in many of our key institutions, including schools and universities. And as a result of those reports and inquiries, many pieces of guidance and new practice have been developed and adopted by educational institutions. People again may remember the black cab rapist John Warboys. His release from prison after only serving 10 years of a life sentence was overturned after 2 of his very first victims won their case, the block case release, after the judge said that both the Parole Board and the Ministry of Justice had made errors during his parole hearing. And we're all immensely grateful for those 2 women that John Warboys is not back out in society. We've also heard from many courageous whistleblowers about the extent of sexual harassment in the workplace, again including in many of our industries and sectors. And of course, this has been the decade of the Me Too campaign. And we thank Tarana Burke for starting Me Too over a decade ago. In this time, we have also remarkably seen new sexual offences come into effect in law, almost all of them driven by campaigners and survivors themselves. So we now have laws against revenge porn, the sharing of sexually explicit imagery without the consent of the person who is depicted in them. Stealthing is also unlawful, the removal of a condom during intercourse without the knowledge or consent of the other person, and most recently upskirting, where taking photographs or filming up women's dresses or skirts without their knowledge or consent. And it's so great to see such appalling behaviour recognised as unlawful. So in a way it comes as no surprise that in recent years, reporting of rape and sexual offences is at its highest level, which is a great thing. More and more survivors are coming forward, speaking out and seeking the support and justice that they have every right to. So it does come as some surprise for us to notice that whilst reporting is at its highest level, prosecution and conviction rates for rape in England and Wales are at their lowest levels since records began a decade ago. And I know I've been talking about this recently because I find this disconnect very difficult to understand. Given that the last decade has seen such a significant increase in reporting, awareness raising, attitudinal changes, and shifts in public and professional perceptions around sexual violence, this decade has not been quiet about sexual violence. It has shone a light on it. It has shown the prevalence of sexual violence for what it is, the devastating consequences of what happens when we disbelieve victims, and the minimizing impact of rape culture. This has not been a time where we could ignore sexual violence, turn away from it and hope someone else would deal with it, or that it would just go away. So it is with some concern and sadness that when the National Rape Monitoring Group report was published in August this year, that we saw the extent of the fall in prosecution and conviction rates in England and Wales. Conviction rates have fallen by 21%. And the proportion of reported rapes prosecuted in England and Wales has now fallen to just 1.4%. Of course, our colleagues in law enforcement agencies are well aware of this situation and are working hard on better understanding what the systemic problems are as to why this is happening and what can be done to improve it. Because we are all in agreement that there is much still to be done to ensure that our criminal justice system is fit for purpose and that we can achieve better outcomes for victims and survivors of sexual violence. One of the other things that I think is worth highlighting about the last decade is the ferocity of some of the backlashes that we have experienced. In the violence against women and girls sector, we are no strangers to the sting in the tail of a backlash. And we all know that a backlash essentially is a strong and negative reaction by a large number of people, especially to a social or political development or change. So in any sector that is working towards social justice and social change, a backlash can actually signify that we are getting a little closer to our destination. Any form of social justice will require a shift in structural power dynamics, and where change may not suit those who have always held the power and privilege, we are likely to feel the sting of a backlash. There were so many examples to pick for you, but I've chosen one, and it's the case actually not in this country, but in the United States, but I think it could be anywhere, any town. It's a case of a 16-year-old boy who raped a girl and filmed the whole offence on his phone and then shared that footage with his friends on social media. The case went to court, and what I've tried to do is capture for you some of the responses of the judge in the case to both the perpetrator and the victim. And just to say, the next two slides do not make for comfortable reading. So the judge in this case argued that the alleged attack did not constitute a traditional case of rape. I'm a little bit confused. I didn't know we have traditional cases and non-traditional cases. What he described a traditional case of rape as was generally two or more males, either at gunpoint or with a weapon, clearly manhandling a person into an area where there was nobody around, sometimes in an abandoned house, sometimes in an abandoned shed or a shack, and just simply taking advantage of the person as well as beating the person and threatening the person. It's such an interesting thing to look at. Obviously, I don't have an hour to unpick all the things that are wrong with this statement, other than to say I think it is really worrying that we have a Superior Court judge redefining the legal definition of rape. You'll perhaps not be surprised to know that the judge went on to say that the video that the boy is alleged to have sent to his peers of the assault was actually just a 16-year-old kid saying stupid crap to his friends. And that the boy was clearly a candidate not just for college, but probably for a good college. So maybe it's just me, but I'm a little confused as to why his educational attainment is relevant in this case at all. And the judge concluded, because he hadn't felt he'd said enough at this point, that the prosecutor should have made it clear to the girl in the case that pressing charges against the boy might destroy his life. Obviously, the lack of regard in this case of the impact of this horrific crime against this girl is shocking enough. But to see the judge find as many ways as he possibly could to excuse the perpetrator's behaviour beggars belief. So whilst backlashes can be exhausting, undermining and harmful, we have to be resilient to them and near indestructible in our pursuit of meaningful social change for survivors of sexual violence. And we have resilience in bucket loads. So I wanted to end on a positive and optimistic note, because I do have positivity and optimism in my life. And just tell you about a couple of pieces of work that we've been involved with over the last few months. And the first is to let you know that we are delighted to say that we have successfully achieved and been awarded the Rape Crisis National Service Standards again this year, and continue to be a professionally approved rape crisis centre. These standards provide us with a robust, bespoke set of specialist core standards for organisations like ours, specialising in working with survivors and delivering sexual violence services. It was an incredibly rigorous process to go through, with an extensive self-assessment procedure requiring a strong evidence base, and a site visit where staff, volunteers and trustees were interviewed, and then our assessment was approved by an independent quality panel. So we're super proud of having achieved those. And we have been doing some work as a direct result of what came out of the Survivors Conference back in June, which was around sexual harassment in the workplace. So we've been working with wonderful colleagues from other organisations to develop the SASH kite mark, which is Stand Against Sexual Harassment in the Workplace. So we're in the process now of developing the work that will underpin the kite mark to support organisations, companies and businesses in our area to improve and implement policies, procedures and processes for dealing with sexual harassment, to look at developing reporting mechanisms and support structures for staff who are affected by sexual harassment, and ultimately to move to an organisational culture that adopts a zero-tolerance policy for sexual harassment. So we're planning to launch the SASH kite mark next year, so watch this space for developments. So at Cambridge Rape Crisis, we might be a small organisation, but we are mighty of heart and ambition. And we feel fairly sure that the SASH kite mark, for example, will and can help to eradicate sexual harassment from the workplace. So once we've achieved that, we will then get back to the work of ending sexual violence in society at large. And when we've achieved that, I'm going to pull up a chair and have a sit down. But until then, I will continue to stand against rape and sexual violence, as I hope you all will too. Thank you.
Running slightly behind time, but I don't think anyone actually minds. But does anybody have any questions? No? Thank you very much. Have you?
I'm doing things with technology.
That's okay. But just also to say that we were just quickly Googling that story that you said, and the judge was made to resign. So that is... Now we're going to hear from Steph.
Hi, I'm going to ad lib because this is we didn't think this presentation was working, so the person who was presenting with me is from Leicester, so she hasn't come because we didn't actually think it was up and running. So I'm going to ad-lib through what Cambridge Women's Resource Centre do. Part of this is this project, but we also run several other projects alongside that. So some of you may know what we do and the breadth of what we do, and others may not. We've developed quite a lot over the last 3 to 4 years, including a change of building. So many of you will recognise us from having been on Hooper Street. They've redeveloped that whole area, so now we're up at the top of Newmarket Road. And we have a women's centre in Signet Court. We also have a women's centre in Peterborough on Broadway, so we reach across both areas. There are some projects which are in both centres, and there are others which are more specific to the location and the population that we are working with in this time. So we see about 500 women a year across both centres. We are an open-based, women-only, trauma-informed service. So women can come in for tea and toast, have a chat, open access computers to do things like housing benefit claims, or just to even check Facebook, home link, that kind of stuff. We have coffee rooms, we have libraries, we have charity donations, we have food donations, and we can offer grants for women who have limited income. We also run a number of projects. So we run the Women's Probation Service across Cambridge and Peterborough. So that's for any women who have entered the criminal justice system. We'll come into the centres and we'll work with a responsible officer and with a Dawn Project worker to look at reasons for offending and to reduce any reoffending. So that will look at a number of pathways which include housing, benefits, debts, abuse, anything that is going to be impacting their life, housing, for instance. We also run an accommodation project for women coming out of prison to women who wouldn't normally be housed in any other situation. So, for instance, they've lost a tenancy or they've got debt, so they come straight out of prison and we will house them. They get floating support along with that project to help get everything set up and to look at budgeting and well-being. We run employability projects across Cambridge and Peterborough. So in Cambridge it's funded by the City Council, in Peterborough it's funded by the Peterborough Community Foundation. So that offers a range of groups, some arty, some educational, and that's led by the voice of the women. So women are very much involved in what we're delivering. So any gaps, they're able to get involved in our peer group, our youth group, our coffee mornings, and say what they want to see and help that develop so it meets their needs. We work in partnership with many organisations as well, because we're keen to support other charities, other partnerships, other community groups. And one of those is Birth as a Medium for Change, which is a doula project we're involved with. And that's to help any women who are pregnant who've been a victim of crime, that have been, had any kind of abuse or experienced sexual violence, to support them through their pregnancy, to demystify a lot of the language that you'll hear from midwives or from the hospital, and to try and make sense of it and make it a positive pathway for women and improve their attachment at the end of it. We also work in partnership with Peterborough Street Sex Workers Project, so we are one of 3. We do a lot of work about getting the voice of women, so we have 69 street sex workers on our books at the moment who are registered with us. We do outreach work with them, we do well-being events, we work with doctors, GPs, dentists, housing, police, many people to make sure that women are as safe as possible when they're out working. I would say we have 83% of our client group have experienced domestic violence, familial and personal. Quite often they have a long history of it through their families, it's generational, and 43% have experienced sexual abuse. We are a universal service, and so where we find that we're working with women who need extra support, we do refer to Women's Aid, Rape Crisis and partner organisations as well in Peterborough, because we're not specialists. You know, we do need to be working together to support women through that journey and make it as positive as possible where it can be. I'm going to stop there, because obviously if you have any questions or you want to talk to me about anything that I've raised today or want to know any more information, with regard to the Peterborough Sex Workers Project, we are going to be delivering training in the new year, so the date's coming up in February. If you want to know more about that, then please just contact the centre and we'll be able to put you on a mail out list for that. All right, thank you.
Catching up with time now, really. Cambridge City Council has been accredited the White Ribbon campaign since February 2015, and to be accredited this you need to be able to fulfil several different strands, which includes to have a strategy in place that provides adequate housing and community support for women and children experiencing and feeling domestic violence, and another is to have male ambassadors as role models. And we're very pleased that we have several ambassadors in Cambridge in different communities, business, sports and young people. And I'd like to introduce these to you today, who will be able to speak briefly on the reasons as to why they came forward to be an ambassador. And if you'd like them to come and talk to any group that you're involved in, please do contact the Council's Community Safety team. So we have Russ McPherson from Cambridge Regional College. There he is, who will be coming up to speak first. There we are. And then we'll have Shapur Mehta. There he is. Adam Ratcliffe and Sam Gomashal from Cambridge United Trust.
I should say good morning, but I will say good afternoon as it's 4 minutes past 12. I still work for Cambridge Regional College in a slightly different role over the last few months. But for 15 years as the Security Student Liaison Manager and also first responder for the college. So that means we basically cover every crisis. If it's a crisis, it comes to us. And certainly in all that time, what we learned was that us, and in actual fact all frontline responders in all the services, are also gatekeepers. You'll see I've got no notes. We're the gatekeepers for many, many issues. And this is one. And it's a very small thing, but people try to help us because we're such a busy team. And you get young people who will pitch up and I say, can I have an ice pack? Okay, well, it took me a while to get well-meaning staff. Don't just give them an ice, don't do that. Because very often they're gateway comments, aren't they? You know, that's what they are. I feel up here that I'm actually a band leader leading a band that already knows the tune, but you understand what I mean. And I'm sure that there are people in this room who have done things like that, because it's not easy, in fact sometimes impossible, just to come out. What is the opportunity? Who provides the opportunity to actually tell someone what is happening in their life? And very often they are these frontline gatekeepers. And many, many times we have unravelled some very, very difficult stories from the phrase, can I have an ice pack? Have you got a plaster? Now, sometimes obviously that is all they want. But happily, myself and my team are very good at spotting that. And you could see there was much more behind that. And sometimes there wasn't. However, it did enable us to pick up many, many cases that would not otherwise have been picked up. And predominantly we found that it was young person partners. So you find 15, 16, 17-year-old girls have partners of maybe 22, 23, 24. And we found that there were some issues involved in some of that, all from, can I have a nice pack? So I guess what I'm saying is, we didn't take anything on face value. What I'm doing now, the first aid and emergency courses I'm running now, advanced first aid and instructor courses I'm running now, I actually build that in. So when I do a first aid and work course, I did a 3-day one last week actually at the college, and built all of that in because we are the gatekeepers. It's not just the standard, I don't just teach the standard stuff that's in the book because I have a lot of practical experience. So I say, okay, this is what the book says, this is what the HSE say we must teach, however, this is what you look for on the actual incident ground, as I call it. These are all the key factors that you need to be looking for to perhaps save that young person who may not otherwise have been detected. And we find that to be very relevant. But I'm not going to take up too much time. I tried very hard to stay to time. I expect people to do that when I'm running meetings, so I try and do it myself. But as many people know, and again there will be many in this room who know, that the ramifications of these situations can go on and on for a lifetime. And I've got something here that I'm going to read, and then that's all I'm going to say, and I'll make way for my good friend Shapur, who I'm absolutely delighted to see. And it's a little poem called Dad. I don't know if anybody's seen that. It's a little poem called Dad, so I'm just going to read this. And then that will be my contribution today. As you can tell, I could be up here all day telling you loads and loads of different permutations and stories and cases, but you don't need to hear that. But I will read you this. This is by Miss Brown. Why did you choose to ruin your life? I'm sure I'll never know. You turned into a nasty man and let your evil grow. You took away my childhood and made me all mixed up. Why could you not have been my dad instead of messing up? You were the handy, helpful man that was known to one and all. It was me who knew the real one, who made my skin crawl. I wanted to be normal, I wanted it to end. I would have told somebody, but I didn't trust a friend. You finally did get put away for all your hateful crimes. It turned out I wasn't the only one to suffer at your hands. The guilt I felt was terrible. I somehow felt to blame, for you were locked up in a cell, but I could feel the pain. Now you are old and lonely with no friends to come your way. I'm the only one who visits you when I have a free odd day. I don't know why I do this. I guess I'm just too soft. I don't have much I want to say. I just sit and let you talk. You're not that powerful man anymore that dictates my every move. I'm the one that's in charge now, and I really feel sorry for you. I don't feel threatened when I kiss your cheek, and when I leave you at the door, you don't have other intentions like you used to have before. You mumble thanks for popping in as your eyes fill up with tears because you are so grateful after all of these years. To have some form of contact to the life that you once knew, but you never have that back. Of this I am quite sure. You often try to let me know that you are happy for my visit and buy me some daft wee thing, but it doesn't matter, does it? I come to see you for myself, to stop the guilty feeling that you are all alone somewhere just staring at the ceiling. I don't know why I still worry that you might be in danger instead of what I'm expected to feel. All I can be is anger. Now I have the task of burying you when that day finally comes, because no one else will do it because of absent chums. Everyone will surely say good riddance to that man, but I know I feel differently because I have forgiven Dad at last. Miss Brown, aged 37. Thank you.
Next we have Shapur Mefta from the Mill Road Traders Association.
Good afternoon, everybody. As you know, my name is Shapur Mefta. I'm one of the White Ribbon Ambassadors, and I'm very proud to be one of them. And I used to be a city councillor for 4 years. And when I came to this country, I started my life. It was hard to do a lot of things. Then this country gave me a lot of things. Now I'm what I am now, and I love to help as much as possible. So when the opportunity for the White Ribbon Ambassador arrived or turned up, I grabbed it. And I love to do my best. And my shop is like an informal popping session. People, they come to my shop, they talk to me about a lot of things, and I'll do my best. And if there's any things which I can't handle, I'll pass it to the right agencies and other things. I think the most important thing is we have to make sure, us or men, we have to be aware of about what we are doing wrong. If we don't tell them that what you are doing is wrong, they will continue with whatever they are doing, and they assume is correct. Because I have a computer shop, people, they come to my shop to do printing and everything, tickets, checking and everything. A few months ago, this is an example. A few months ago, I had this young couple, English couple, they came to the shop to print their ticket and to go. They booked the computer for half an hour, and while they were in mad process of checking in, I think one of them forgot to bring the passport, because that is one of the requirements. He went crazy with her. He said, "Oh, you, whatever, you forgot to bring it. Why didn't you bring it? We come all the way here and you can't." And he was going mental. Anyway, I tried to cool them down a bit. I said, "Look, I'm here until 6 o'clock, so you've got plenty of time. Just one of you go home and bring it." Anyway, who goes home? She did. She went home, and while he was there, I made him a cup of coffee, and I started to talk to him, and I said, "What's happened? What's happening? Are you going anywhere nice?" He said, "Yeah, we booked our holiday, and we're going to go for 2 weeks holiday and all that." And I asked him about what does he do for a living, and a lot of questions, that half an hour, what he was. Then the last question I asked him, "What's going to happen if she leaves you? What's going to happen?" He said, "I didn't think about it. I don't know what's going to happen. If she leaves me, I'm going to be devastated. I'm going to kill myself." I said, "Look, the way you treat her, that few minutes of conversation, you call their names and everything, that is not right." Anyway, then he went quiet. She turned up, they did the print, and everything was fine. They left. The good news was, a few days ago, they came back from holiday, both of them, and they had a box of chocolate for me. And she said, "I don't know what you said to him, but that was the best time of my holiday and everything." So I love that, and that was one of the cases. Then the other thing, we have to make sure help is available. At the moment, not many people are aware of what is White Ribbon, what is that. I mean, when I talk to them, what is it? Then I have to physically show them on the internet, say, "Look, this is a White Ribbon page, this is what we do, and whatever is happening." So we have to make sure to give them enough information, help is available. This is not right what you're doing, and we have to do our best to make sure that we don't give up on them, because if we do, we never get anywhere. I just want to I received some of the text messages from people which they come to my shop. I don't want to show off, but I just want to say, "Hi, Shah, that is one of my customers. When he came to my shop, I talked to him and I explained about the White Ribbon and other things. Hi, Shah, what a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for the inspiration. I have submitted my details as a volunteer for White Ribbon program. This looks an ideal fit for me. All the best, team." So this happened a few days after that argument which those couple they had. I think he was there, he listened to what I said to them, and I think he wanted to join the White Ribbon program. Then another one, sorry to keep you going, but it's nice to tell you that things are going on. We're not just sitting down doing nothing, but it's nice to Sorry, I'm just going to get this for you. This is another Muslim lady. She had a lot of problem at home with her father, mother, and the brothers and everything else. Salam, that means hello. I'm all right. Thank you for all your advice. I spoke to them because I told her, please talk to your family, talk to your brother, talk to your dad, mom. Try to sort things out because this is not going to, if it is continuous, one of you just going to, whatever. I spoke to them, they were apologized, and we cleared the misunderstandings. My heart feels a little lighter. I'm catching the coach tomorrow morning. I'll be back soon enough. Thank you for taking me under your wing. I'll write to you. Please take care too. You spend too much time looking out for others. Then I had a phone call from her and she said, I'm very happy and thank you for all the advice and everything else. So I'm very proud to be a white ribbon ambassador and I'll do my best, everything to help as much as possible. I've done a lot and I want to do a lot more. So that's why we are here, to be able to help each other to move on. And I don't want to take too much time, but that's it. I'm here. My shop is in Mill Road, and anybody wants to come and see me, I'm there all the time from 9 to 6. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Next we have Adam Ratcliffe from Cambridge Business Against Crime.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be here. It's also a huge honour to be a White Ribbon Ambassador. It's just a fraction of the amazing work that's going on in Cambridge to try and tackle this issue. And I'm hugely proud to somehow be attached to some of the work that these incredible people are doing, especially within the City Council, and the work that people like Louise Walker are driving for this, and also supporting some of the incredible partnership agencies that we heard about earlier on in the day. As a former police officer based in Cambridge at the Parkside Police Station, I saw firsthand the devastation that domestic abuse can cause to individuals. Even in the short time that I was in that role, I saw the rate of domestic abuse calls for service to the police increase rapidly. And they were repeat calls as well as new calls, and I saw just how damaging it was to people's lives, both victims and then family members of those victims. So from then, that kind of drove my passion to try and do something to change what was going on. Because of it being such an underreported issue, that was something that I felt that I could potentially help raise the profile, because I like to talk a lot and hopefully people will listen occasionally when I jabber on about stuff. In my current role, I run an organisation called Cambridge Business Against Crime. It's a business crime partnership that works directly with businesses within a certain geographical area, so mine is Cambridge and the surrounding areas. Predominantly retail businesses, but as licensed trade, licensed premises, pubs, clubs, bars. And so some of the work that I'm able to do is to raise the awareness within those organisations, not only in-house with their own staff, but also to be aware of the customers that are coming in. So with licensed trade, pubs, clubs, bars, a lot of those early indicators of people who are perpetrators of domestic abuse will come out in a public domain. And a lot of the time people would ignore it. Arguments, aggression, even potentially violence towards partners, towards family members happens when alcohol's involved, we all know that. But those early warning signs potentially could be something that prevents someone from getting seriously hurt or ongoing issues. So what we're trying to do is raise awareness with those staff members and with the management of those businesses so that they can feel empowered to try and report those issues to some of the incredible partnership agencies or directly to the police. Some of the initiatives that we do, we help coordinate the Ask for Angela campaign. For those of you that don't know what Ask for Angela is, it's a national campaign that basically puts in place within licensed premises an initiative where if someone's out on a date, they're meeting someone for the first time, they feel unsafe, they feel like something is wrong, maybe that person that they've organised to meet online isn't the person that they thought they were talking to. If they feel threatened and they feel scared, they're able to approach a member of staff and simply ask if Angela's there. The staff are trained to understand that this means that person needs help. Now, whether that help is just going over and speaking to them, whether it's to call them a cab to get them home, or whether it's to get them to a place of safety and dial 999, they're trained on how to do that. And the number of businesses that we've got working with us on that is increasing every day. So we're really, really pleased with that scheme. Also, very recently, we worked with a company called the Good Night Out campaign, which is based in London, and they are focused on trying to eradicate the culture within licensed premises of sexually abusive and aggressive behaviour, especially towards women, but towards everyone. So the quote-unquote lad culture that goes on a lot in licensed clubs and bars. We've done a training session where we had 100 members of the licensed trade come into a room and sit and engage with the trainers there to try and raise their awareness of what is and isn't acceptable, which may seem obvious but sometimes isn't, because the culture of acceptance there is wrong and we need to change that. But it's also empowering those staff that don't earn huge amounts of money, they're working hard, they're stretched, they're understaffed. But when they see something that doesn't feel right, that they act upon it, but also when someone looks unsafe, they look scared, that they feel that they can approach that member of staff and that they can speak to them. When we spoke to a lot of people within the city, and especially young women, about their experience in the nighttime economy, it was an alarming number of people said that they wouldn't dare speak to a member of the door staff if they've been sexually assaulted within the venue. So that set alarm bells off for us. When speaking to members of the door staff community, they were devastated to hear that. But they understand that they embody the very thing that potentially could have caused that harassment and caused that violence. So we're working with those door companies to make sure that they understand and that they're aware as well. That's an ongoing thing, with the overall goal to be an accreditation that's put in place, that all licensed premises within the city will go through that accreditation process to better understand sexual violence, sexual harassment, and all associated types of behaviour. So I've been going on and on long enough, but that's basically what we do. If anybody's ever got any questions or want to speak to me about anything to do with that, then I'm always available. But thank you very much for listening to me.
And our final white ribbon speaker, but not the final speaker of this afternoon, because we do have one surprise speaker coming up. Sam Comershaw from Cambridge United Community Trust.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Nicky. As Nicky said, I work for Cambridge United Community Trust, which is the official charity of Cambridge United. We use the power of sport and the brand of the local football club to hopefully make a difference in our local community through education, inclusion and health initiatives. So I wanted to be a White Ribbon Ambassador to highlight the role that sport and also football can play in reducing the level of violence against women. I think there are 3 ways in which it can do that. So firstly, I think football and sport can stand up against violence from the very top. I think secondly, it can stand up against violence on a more personal, dressing room based way. And thirdly, I think football has a unique ability to change views, and I think one of the key areas that would help in this is changing the views of what it means to be a man. So firstly, standing up to violence from the very top. Research has shown that domestic abuse cases rise when England play World Cup matches. So in 3 World Cups, 2002, 2006, 2010, this was measured in one particular area. And there were 38% more cases of domestic abuse when England lost their match. There were 26% less when England won their match, and there are 11% more cases the day after a World Cup match. Now obviously there's going to be many things which are in play here, potentially more drinking and drugs, but certainly football has a role to play in this. In particular, football needs to take a braver, more positive voice and truly speak out against violence against women. And that means players coming out and speaking, and I will try my very best on a Cambridge United element to get more players coming out and talking about this issue, which is so prevalent. Secondly, on a more personal level, I play for a semi-professional team, and I think so much more can be done about the language which is used within dressing rooms and the culture which really permeates certainly in dressing rooms, but I think football in general. And so where there is that misogynistic language, which there definitely still is, I pledge to call that out, as hard as that sometimes can be for footballers to call out their mates and their teammates. I think it's a really important message that needs to be sent. Thirdly, and this is maybe the area I'm most interested in, I think young boys today are, as I'm sure you all know, are told that there are signals that they have to be a certain type. And actually sport doesn't always help in that, because football and sport creates this idea that you have to play sport to be a man. And actually, this is something that I'm so passionate about changing, because growing up, I was that sporty kid, but I also probably didn't quite fit into the traditional view or identity of what it meant to be really manly. I know it's really hard for you to probably believe. However, so I work for Cambridge United Community Trust, and we do lots of work with young people, whether that's through our mental health initiatives, whether that's through disability sport, or through our school sport coaches. And actually, an important message that I want to get into every member of our staff is that typecasting goes on from such a young age, and is so prevalent. And if we can somehow change what it means for young boys to think they have to be manly, to think they have to be a man, sport is that way of doing so. Getting players coming out and talking, the way that school sport coaches behave, their general demeanour, it makes such a difference. And I pledge that from a Cambridge United Community Trust aspect, we will do our very best to change what it means to be a man. Finally, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me. It's a real honour to be a White Ribbon ambassador, and yeah, thank you for having me.
I think we should actually just give another round of applause for all of our White Ribbon ambassadors, because there are amazing. From working within our schools, within our shops, within our pubs and clubs, to within our sports, I think the fact that we do have men coming forward to say actually things do need to change, it really is hopeful. And our final speaker, before I sum up, is actually Angie Stewart from Women's Aid. Briefly mentioned that one of the Ask Me ambassadors held a business conference. And Sharon Livermore, I'd like her to come up and just give us a 5 minutes brief introduction as to what that entailed and how that went.
Recruitment, which is based in Cambridge. I am a survivor of domestic abuse myself, so for me, I set up the business 18 months ago, not to obviously just do recruitment, but to raise awareness of domestic abuse as well. So this is completely off the cuff. I haven't planned this at all today, so I've got a few notes with me. So basically, on the 7th of November, I myself, along with Angie from Cambridge Women's Aid and Nicky Massey, held a seminar in Cambridge that was aimed at local businesses. When I first decided to do this, I wasn't aware at all of how many people would be interested in coming. On the day, we had 29 businesses that came along, some of those huge companies, including Redgate, who obviously Cambridge Women's Aid have already mentioned. The reach of that on the actual day was 24,545 employees that potentially are now going to have access to better policies and procedures around domestic abuse. So the talk itself was aimed, what is domestic abuse? People think they know, but actually a lot of people are really surprised by all the different aspects of what domestic abuse actually is. So it was really important to get that message across there. Also the signs within employees, so if people are late for work, if people are panicking to get home on time, or they maybe can't attend some of the events that are put on, then it's worth people sort of thinking about, is that actually their behaviour, or have they got something going on at home? Also how to help as well. So Ange did an amazing presentation about the ways that people can and employers can actually help their employees if they need it. So really the purpose of me standing here today is to tell you a little bit about what I did as an Ask Me Ambassador. The feedback we've had so far has been amazing. Every single company that came has said that they learned something from it, but more importantly, 4 of them already are putting in domestic abuse policies that they didn't have before, and some of those are businesses that have 1,000+ employees. So really, from now moving forwards, we are looking at different ways of maybe replicating this in different areas or taking it to another level. So really, I guess all of you here, there's a lot of you that will work within businesses and or maybe own businesses. If you are interested in finding out more, it would be really good to have you on board so we can invite you along to further forums or seminars that we hold as well. I will be around at lunchtime, so if anyone wants to pop and say hello and grab the details, then please do. So I hope that's given you a little bit of an overview of where you can reach and how you can obviously have a positive impact on your local network. So thank you for listening.
Sorry that I dropped that on you really quickly. That's fine. So there's now for me to sum up what we've heard already, and I think there's so many positive things. The sash kite mark is really exciting that that's coming forward. As Sharon said, we do have the Domestic Abuse Community Forum, which anybody can join. And it would be really, really great to see some newcomers. And if you are interested, then please get in touch with our community, the Cambridge City Community Safety Team, who will then put your name on the list to join up for the next forum. That's how Sharon got involved, and that's from the forum after that, Sharon then became an Ask Me Ambassador, and then from that held the business conference. And it was a really eye-opening morning. So I am a survivor myself, so I often speak on the platform as from the perspective of a survivor. And so it was exactly that for the business forum that I attended, I told everybody my experiences and what it was like for me when I was at work and it was happening and it was all going through. So it really is vitally important. And if you do want to hold your own business conference, then please do get in touch with Sharon. I just want to thank you all very much for attending, and I'm going to thank all of our speakers, but I also want to thank Antoinette for her support, as always, of the conference, and Louise Walker for her organisational skills in bringing it all together and supporting it. We do hope you stay for lunch. There is food and water in both halls. If you can't stay for lunch, but please do go and take a box so the food doesn't get wasted, and take an opportunity to look at the artwork. And as I say, consider joining the community forum meeting, or if you can't do that, why don't you consider being an Ask Me Ambassador, and we can get that 99 to turn that into 100.